What's going on, y'all? Attorney Tom here. In today's video, I'm going to be reacting to a Work Safe BC video titled Asbestos. Now, I'm not really sure what this video is going to cover. It's relatively short, but we're going to watch it, react to it, and I'm going to insert my comments because, unfortunately, I know a whole lot about asbestos and the derivative diseases it causes, specifically mesothelioma, which, if you have ever watched TV, you've probably seen a commercial for mesothelioma lawsuits.
People who have been diagnosed with mesothelioma.
Mesothelioma, a rare form of lung cancer normally caused by exposure to asbestos.
If you or a loved one have been diagnosed with mesothelioma,
let's jump right into it.
Asbestos is a fibrous mineral that's resistant to chemicals and heat, and very tough.
So, not to pause the video right at the beginning, but that's exactly why asbestos was/is so prominent. It was a great fire-resistant mineral that could be used as insulation, that could be used to protect things. The only downside is it's extremely deadly.
It was also added to the building materials of many older homes. As a worker or homeowner, the hazard exists when undertaking a renovation or demolition. The danger is releasing the asbestos fibers into the air.
That's literally, makes my arm hair raise up. Like I said earlier, there are various types of diseases that can come from asbestos exposure, anything from asbestosis to cancer to mesothelioma. In fact, right now I'm involved in the Johnson & Johnson talcum powder litigation. Essentially what this litigation is there were pretty substantial amounts of asbestos in the talcum powder. Talc and asbestos are very similar in quality and feel and texture, and they're actually derivative or derived from the same place. So the talcum powder actually had asbestos mixed into it, and there's science that is strong that supports even the tiniest bit of exposure to asbestos can cause cancer. So just one asbestos fiber can do serious damage. So essentially, in the Johnson & Johnson baby powder litigation, women who primarily used baby powder were quite literally inserting pieces of asbestos into their bodies, and that exposure caused cancer to the areas that the talcum powder was exposed to. So what you end up having is a whole bunch of women who developed ovarian cancer due to asbestos exposure. And not to get too off track, but it's not just ovarian cancer. I have clients who have fallopian tube cancer. I have clients who have mesothelioma as a result of their asbestos exposure that was in this talcum powder. I digress. Let's continue with the video.
When a worker breathes, asbestos fibers enter the mouth and nose and flow down the air passages deep into the lungs. The fibers lodge in the delicate lung tissue where oxygen is absorbed into the blood. Immune system cells try and break down the asbestos fibers and become damaged and die.
And as the cells die, the lungs harden. And as the lungs harden, it becomes harder and harder to breathe. This is called mesothelioma, when the lungs basically become so hard, it suffocates people to death. I have met people who have mesothelioma, and it is described as slowly drowning to death because it literally becomes harder and harder to breathe until you suffocate to death. As many of you know, my father is a catastrophic personal injury lawyer as well, and he has probably tried 30 to 50 mesothelioma cases. He tried them in the early 90s when this litigation was new and the science had yet to be determined or established, I should say. and he has seen some horror stories. Being from a port city in Texas where there are a lot of refineries, asbestos was prominent in the refineries, in the factories. It was used as a fire retardant. And what happened was you had dozens and dozens and dozens, not even dozens, you had hundreds or thousands of workers who went to work every day in an asbestos-filled environment, and you saw them get wiped out. The cancer rate was through the roof, the mesothelioma rate was through the roof, and it wasn't just the refinery workers who were predominantly male. A lot of these gentlemen would come home with asbestos all over their clothes. They would hand their clothes to their wife. Their wife would clean the clothes. They would whack them to move the debris. They would put them in the washer, and the asbestos fibers would get into the wife's lungs as well. My father represented a lady who died of mesothelioma. She was not a factory worker. Her husband was. That is how she got exposure to asbestos, by literally cleaning his clothes.
Scar tissue forms around the dead cells and spreads as more fibers embed in the lungs. Asbestos fibers can remain in the lungs for long periods, and the scar tissue that results continues to develop for many years after exposure. Eventually, so much scar tissue develops that the lungs stop working. Since the year 2000, more workers have died from asbestos disease in BC than any other workplace injury.
And here's the thing about exposure to asbestos. All you need to do is be exposed one time, and that asbestos could lay dormant in your body, or specifically your lungs, and you don't know when the scar tissue around your lungs is going to grow and grow and grow. There's some crazy statistic, and I can't remember the exact number, but I know lawyers, that's pretty much all they do is mesothelioma work. 5,000 to 10,000 people a year will die of mesothelioma every year until 2060 or 2065 or something crazy like that. That's because there's so much asbestos in old houses, old factories, that people are still being exposed to it. And on top of that, there are people who were exposed to it years ago who haven't developed the symptoms yet, but it will happen. And not to get too much into the details of the logistics of litigation and all that kind of stuff, I just think this is fairly interesting. So the keyword Mesothelioma Lawyer is the most expensive term on the internet. If I were to click one of these ads, it would probably charge that lawyer about $800 to $900. And that should tell you how important or profound this litigation is. Literally, asbestos exposure is the only thing that can cause mesothelioma, nothing else. So there's no excuse that, oh, this worker would have gotten mesothelioma anyway, or hey, we didn't do it because he got some other form of cancer that you can get from anything. Mesothelioma is only caused by asbestos exposure. And if y'all are interested, let me know in the comments. I can go into more of the history of asbestos, but essentially there is strong evidence to support that the companies who made asbestos knew that it was dangerous. The companies that implemented asbestos knew that it was dangerous, yet they continued to implement it in the infrastructure of America because, one, it was cheap and there were high profit margins. Two, it's actually a fairly effective material for being fire retardant, other than it literally kills people. So when this litigation came to light, most of the asbestos makers had to declare bankruptcy. The bankruptcy funds went into one big mesothelioma trust because, like I said, the science supports that people are going to keep dying from mesothelioma until the year 2060 or something crazy like that, probably even longer. So there is a whole bunch of money, billions and billions of dollars, I think $30 billion in a mesothelioma trust. So even today, individuals who develop mesothelioma have a form of recourse, although it is very insignificant. To be crass, I have never met a person in my line of work, catastrophic personal injury, which I would classify mesothelioma as catastrophic personal injury, who'd rather get money than their health back. Quite literally, mesothelioma is a death sentence, but Nonetheless, there is a form of recourse for people who develop mesothelioma. They hire a lawyer, the lawyer sues on behalf of the victim. The hard part about this litigation is even though there is a trust for mesothelioma victims, you have to determine where that person developed mesothelioma. And now a lot of these people who have mesothelioma developed it or were exposed to asbestos in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. So even though there's this trust, the litigation certainly isn't easy, if that makes sense. And all the potential defendants love to point fingers and say, hey, this guy wasn't exposed to asbestos on our refinery, he was exposed to at the other refinery. Or, yeah, he might have been exposed barely at our refinery, but he was exposed 20 times more at the other place. Just typical bullshit like that. So it's not as clear cut as you might think it is because this litigation has been going on forever, but it still exists. All right, that's it for today's video. I'm sorry this wasn't a typical goofy type video. I still hope you found it entertaining or you learned something. Asbestos is definitely not something to mess around with. And y'all, thank you so much for watching my videos. As I said before, I have so much interesting stuff planned for this channel. I have some things being built, which I'm going to keep secret. We're going to start going on field trips. I need direction. I need y'all to tell me what things you want us to do. For instance, if you want us to do a full history about asbestos, it's actually fairly interesting, then let me know. Or if you want me to go and examine other things. This channel's goal is to create content worthy of your time. We just passed 410,000 subscribers, which is unbelievable. All right, y'all. Talk to you later. Bye.